Hi everybody, Adrian Plass here,
Yes, and Bridget. Hello.
and this is number 121 in Sounding the Shadows. And I was saying just now to Bridget that I said, isn't 121 11 times 11? And she confirmed that it was.
No, I didn't, Adrian. I had no idea.
She didn't know. Oh, she didn't know.
No, I didn't know.
Excellent. When I was a child, the one sum I could never remember in our tables, which we repeated, like many of you, I expect, was the 11 times 11. It seemed impossible that it could become 121. I don't know why. But anyway, here we are, 121. So what have we been up to then? What's going on?
Well, I'll tell you what's happening in our week, in our house. And it's like a sort of throwback to other times, because in our hall there is a staggering number of boxes containing your books.
Oh, right.
And that hasn't happened for a very long time, because there hasn't been a new book for a long time, but also because we're actually going on a very small tour next week, aren't we?
We are. We're in Scotland next week, which we love being in.
Yeah.
Now, are you going to be able to remember where each of these?
Well, it's only four
there aren't
places.
that many, are there?
No, because this is the first bit in Scotland, and so we're in East Kilbride, and we're in Ayr, and we're in Larbert, and then very hopefully this one isn't quite finalised yet, but we're in Pennycuick, if that's the way you pronounce it. Right. And I think I feel that same sort of mixture of looking forward to it enormously, but at the same time feeling a bit worried about it, hopefully getting it all organised, and but looking for more than anything, I think, Adrian, to meeting the people who come, because it's such a joy. Sometimes there's people we haven't seen for ages, aren't there, who pop up.
Well, it's amazing how many people we actually know who pop up, because we've been travelling around, certainly UK and other countries for years and years, and it's really nice.
Yeah, and I mean, the truth is that with our memories not being great, and with it being a long time since we've done it, we might not remember names, but I know that we'll recognise faces, and I'm really excited about that side of things.
Oh, we'll have a laugh when whatever else happens.
Yeah.
And it is good to have the new book out. Still Crazy. And this particular book, it seems amazing that it actually is here now, because although the writing of it happened the way writing usually happens, you have an idea, you write it, and on you go. But putting it together, which we both had quite a hand in, was a long process, wasn't it? And
well, because it's a collection.
Very difficult. Yeah.
I think when when you did The Shadow Doctor, and even then it took a bit of putting it together, but it was a narrative, wasn't it? It was a novel.
That's right,
whereas this is a collection of all sorts of things. The thing that holds them together is that they were all written within the last decade, all these pieces.
That's correct, yeah.
And anybody thinking back over the last decade will realise a lot of things have happened in their lives during 10 years. We have in common with just about everybody the years of the pandemic, and we now have in common the years of anxiety about what's going on in Ukraine, fear about money, worrying about... There's a lot of things we have in common, but then there are certain things, I have to say, that you could say might be unique to the particular way your brain works, Adrian.
Like what?
Oh, I'm not saying them now.
Oh, right.
No, you have to read the book. But, yeah.
I see you're referring to the section about me balancing things on my head.
I am, and a few other things as well.
You heard that, did you? Balancing things on my head. I have confessed at last. But actually, there are lots of sections, and one of them, you won't be surprised to hear, is called The Church Marches On, which is an ironic title, because it reflects the fact that, I mean, we've been Christians for years, but the same things seem to crop up over and over again.
Yes, they do.
The things that people say, we must tackle this, we must get a grip on this, and you do for a bit, and then you don't, and then someone else says, do you know, we really got to tackle this.
Yes, that's right.
I don't know whether you ever reach a point where you can say, well, that's got rid of that.
Well, what is interesting is that you found just the other day, didn't you, something you'd written a long time ago, which you're going to read, which is, I mean, the interesting thing is that it could have been written yesterday. It could have been written this decade, this last week, because it is a perennial problem
Yeah.
in the church. Well, and not just in the church, in the way we live our lives. I mean, I don't know, if you're thinking about this week, I think you might say you could define it by there being a lot of knocking down of people. People are frightened, and that does make people maybe do that even more. But there was so much kindness around during the funeral, and the whole business of people queuing in the cold and making new friends. That kindness has rather gone, I think, when I look at the news coming up on my laptop, the news, the headlines in the newspapers. Maybe it was inevitable, but yeah.
Yeah, well, the thing that this piece is about gossip, which it really has been almost like a cancer in the church, not just in the church, but certainly in the church, for years and years and years. And when you start to think of the reasons for it and why it continues to get a grip on people, I mean, one thing you have to say, to be absolutely honest, is that quite often gossip is very enjoyable, and it's so tempting if you hear something isn't almost said and you think, well, I'd really like to know about that. And I really try, we both do try to avoid that, but there are times when you still get drawn in, and you can feel quite guilty, can't you, about that?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, it is like having an appetite for something that is not very good for you. And you can, just for a little while, you feel you belong, don't you? You feel you're safe within this group of people who are, I don't know, running somebody down. And for a few seconds, few minutes, and then it can make you feel really sick, and you really need to do something about it to get rid of that feeling. But I am interested in the fact that it is something that, I mean, Jesus talked about it. They talked about it in the Old Testament. I mean, about judging people, about hurting people, about putting people down. It was around then. And this piece that you wrote, that you found, you wrote a long time ago, but it could have been written last week, couldn't it? I mean, it could have been written today.
But it was based partly on someone we used to know, who you will remember, who is no longer with us, who used to sit with a group of people and say, just between and then he'd count us, and he'd say, just between the 12 of us, and it didn't matter how many there were, it was still going to be shared with all that. So you'll hear a little bit of that as I go on. This is somebody who's in a meeting, and he's heard the bit from Matthew where Jesus talks about the fact that you shouldn't criticize others and judge them, and you know, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye, and you haven't taken the speck out of it. So this fellow's commenting on that. So true. And I should know, because just between the 7 of us, and in confidence and purely for prayer, someone in our house group does exactly what Jesus is talking about. This person, name begins with Z, and has a significant role in the second-tier leadership of our church, a bit surprising perhaps, is constantly judging others and generally being negative. I have literally implored Stanley, our group leader, to say something to Z, but sad old Stanley is no more able to confront now than he ever was. When you consider he's allowed Eve thingy, whatever her name is, who may or may not be a believer, to get away with something really close to heresy for the whole year since she attached herself to us, it's clear not much to be expected in that quarter. The shame of it is that Zed's critical attitude and Stanley's weakness brings out the very worst in Jeanette, who, having paid her debt to society and presumably been forgiven by God, his ideas, not mine, is not going to benefit from having her anti-social proclivities stimulated, if you grasp my inference. Oh, that's leaving aside the fact that if Jeanette gives way to her subversive instincts, we won't see Malcolm for dust. Malcolm can't cope with mild females, let alone Jeanette in full flow. So the only one who's not affected by Zed's unpleasantness is Nigel Stratton, but then he's not been affected by anything for so long. I remember he's never been able to, poor soul. he'd win prizes for nodding and smiling, but there's no edge to him since he took his holiday. You know what I mean? If you get my drift. So there we are. Let's pray now for Zephaniah. Oops, I mean Zed, to see the light and hopefully become a little bit more like the rest of us.
That's pretty horrible, really.
It is, isn't it?
It is, but it does happen. And actually, Adrian, I mean, I was talking to somebody just the other week who was devastated by some really negative stuff actually directed to him. So, but it had obviously built up from people talking behind his back. And this person who finally confronted him gave him the impression that everybody thought the same thing. And this guy, and it was a man, but I was talking to him about something else that you wrote a very long time ago. The thing about these things is they are like graffiti. Do you remember what you wrote? I mean, it was that God
was
wants
a bit in
to
the
write
Old Testament says he's going to write his law on
your
our
hearts.
But
But sometimes it's so covered with this graffiti that has actually been carved into you. And the particular person I was talking about has always had that problem of feeling he's no good, of having had negative things said, open to bullying. And here it's happening again years later. And he's within the church. And it just, for every negative thing that we say to somebody, there has to be something. And I was reminding him of some positive things people had said about him. And I said to him, I doubt if those are even touching you. Because that one thing that was said to you just recently has just brought up all the other stuff from your life.
You wonder,
it's not
don't
small,
you?
Is it?
You wonder whether it's a way for people to release a little bit of tension, or I as you were saying that, and we haven't talked about this for years, but when I worked with the kids years ago, and we were in shifts, and I remember one day I was in the pub with a member of another shift, and she said to me, that shift that were on before us yesterday, they have left a disgusting mess. I have never seen anything like it. That is no way to behave. How are the children ever going to learn how to behave if they're treated like that? I really think someone should have a word with them. And there was a pause, and I said, actually, I was leading that shift. And then another pause, and then she said, well, it wasn't quite as bad as all that, I suppose, when I think about it.
Yeah.
So the inference of that, or the conclusion you draw, is that people don't actually want to be nasty to people. But there is, as you said earlier, a bit of a sweet appetite for being in a little group where you can talk about other people's
I mean, you're
shortcomings.
mentioning shifts in a secure unit. I think it could apply to people making the coffee. Or, I mean, I remember in one church we were in, and we loved being in this church. It was nothing to do with the church, really. But in the kitchen, there were lots of different cubbies that belonged to all the different organisations that used the hall. And they were constantly moaning about the other people who used the hall. You know, that they reckoned people had taken out their tea bags or used one of their biscuits or something. It's very bad for us, isn't it? And it is part of that need to. I think it comes down to something that we all have, which is the need to belong. And how do you belong?
Right.
And if you can find a way of belonging, even if it's a negative one, then for a little while you feel you belong.
I think it's true of a number of things, and not just gossip, but telling the truth is another one. And by that I don't mean people telling each other lies about things exactly, but a kind of corporate agreement that if you go too far down and you're talking about what's actually happening to people, I'm talking about in the church, but I mean it happens in all groups really. If you go too far down, it will begin to fall to pieces. You know, if you take the lid off, what are you going to discover? But actually it's really, really bad for groups to be existing with a level of corporate truth that bears no resemblance to what is actually happening to people. And I don't know how you work with that. You can't suddenly say everybody has to tell the truth. I remember when I had this breakdown years ago, and this fantasy I had was that we all go to church with a little black bag, and in it we know there's all the evidence for faith, and we're all happy, and we're feeling good, and every Sunday we take it along, we pat our bag, and we put our thumbs up to people, and they do the same, and we say, oh yeah, I've got lots in mine, yeah, lots in yours. And then one day, to our horror, the minister or the leader says, right, today, for a change, we're going to open our bags. And people are aghast, and then they open their bags, take the lid up and look inside. And I, at that time, feeling pretty wretched about myself, I remember thinking, what am I going to find when I look into this
And I remember,
bag?
what did you find?
Well, I found Jesus, because
You said in the corner.
in the corner, because right at the beginning of me being attracted to the idea of following him was him on the cross saying yes to a man who said, will you remember me? And being remembered myself, saying the same thing really. So he was there, but I guess every single person, when they look into that bag, is going to find something different.
Yes, I mean, you said about going down through the layers, and I was thinking, I know there will be one or two people for whom, if they opened their bag, there would be loads of books that told them all sorts of different things about what they might achieve and how they might achieve it. And I just hope that everybody who, who is trying to follow Jesus will find that is still part of it, really. Because that's where they're safe, that's where they belong. There's a line in one of your poems in this book, isn't there, Adrian, if you can remember it, and we haven't got it with us in front of us, but what is it? But your heart will go on like a rain-soaked Liverpool supporter,
That's right,
knowing
yes.
that you do not walk alone. I haven't quoted that exactly right, but it's a lovely
Yeah.
poem, and I think that's it, really. You said going along, some of you happily chattering, some of you muttering worriedly, but all walking along in the same direction. And that's why we need to encourage each other. Nobody needs to be knocked down or talked about or slandered, or we need all of us to be lifted up and dragged along when we're muttering miserably, because we don't walk alone.
That's true. Part of this, is habit, isn't it? It's very easy to get into habits, negative habits, and breaking them is really, really a really difficult thing
Well,
to
it's
do.
scary, isn't it? It puts you outside. Yeah. That's true.
I was just thinking about something else from years ago, really, about reading something Jesus said. It was when they were in the locked room, and he was resurrected and appeared there. And they finally realized who he was and said, it's him, it's the Lord, after he'd eaten fish for some reason. And then the Bible says 4 words: he opened their minds.
Yeah.
He opened their minds. And I think there is a perpetual need to, by an effort of the will, open your mind and your will and your heart, and to say, have I got into habits that actually are negative within this community?
Yeah.
It's so easy to happen. And actually, once you acknowledge it, and you're with people who agree with you that it's a great thing to move forward in that way, it's a wonderful feeling, I think.
Yes. Well, next week we'll be in Scotland.
Yes, we shall be speaking to you from Scotland. But
we will, from Lanarkshire.
But our accents will be unaltered, won't they?
Yeah. And I mean, we did want to say that if you do want to buy a book from Adrian's website, please contact us, because we've got a lot of them in our hall, and it would be lovely to lessen the number of books in those boxes. No, seriously, we'd love some of you to read it, and we'd love to know what you think, because you won't necessarily like all of it.
No, it's interesting when you get to this age, same age as King Charles, as I think I pointed out.
As your mother pointed out to you constantly.
You start asking yourself, well, two things I noticed recently. One is looking at the books I've read many times over my lifetime that we have. Will I read them again? And the other is, will I write one again? I think I'll probably write one again. But it's very strange when you reach this stage in a life or a career. You don't really know what will come next. Anyway, I don't quite know where to go with that, except that I think I shall go on writing probably to the end. I shall enjoy that. And we shall enjoy hearing from you too. So please,
we will.
Please get in touch.
Yeah.
God bless you. See you next week. Bye-bye.